ya, folks. It Chapter 2 isn't a sequel that surpasses the original. This doesn't make it a bad movie though. It's still cinematically rich in terms of set pieces, production design, and sequences, but it struggles to deliver on story and some of its characters. The movie takes place 27 years after the first movie and is interlaced with flashbacks to their childhood. They have to stop it once and for all. Mike Hanlon, played by Isaiah Mustafa, calls them to return to Derry after someone's been murdered by it. The losers go back to Maine, and that's where the fun begins. The running time of this movie is 2 hours and 49 minutes, and how it feels is polarizing. It's either an easy 3-hour ordeal, or it's plodding. Certain parts pass by fast because of the strength of some of the characterizations and some of the writing, but when the other characters aren't presented that well, it's more like, here's another Muschietti horror sequence. It's going to end relatively the same as the others. I will say that the CGI and ADR for the clubhouse scene with the kids was very odd. Maybe it was jarring because it's the first DH flashback we get to see, but it wasn't that natural sounding. The ones later on weren't as jarring, probably because individually it's harder to tell the distortion and we get used to it. If you don't look closely enough, it's definitely passable, but something is off. Finn and Jack as Richie and Eddie sound the most off out of the rest. However, if you don't have any recollection of what they sounded like in the first movie, then this won't be an issue. Also, CGI can't hide height. I thought the flashback scenes, with the exception of a few, were redundant at times. They were cool to watch, but they didn't do much to further the story. I was totally fine with flashbacks that bridged things that happened in the first movie but were never shown or revealed in the first place, as long as it furthered the story. But if they didn't and only occurred to establish a pattern or formula with the adult losers individually, then that could have been time distributed to explain some things that occur in the movie more. I'm all for less is more, but this film either spends too much time on something we already know from the first movie, or it doesn't spend enough time in the present to explain things clearly with these adults. Pretty much two characters were a delight to watch, Richie Tozier and Eddie Kaspbrak. Their scenes were solid throughout the movie, and they inhabit the spirit of their younger versions as well. The rest of the losers lacked a little pizzazz. The younger versions of themselves were filled with life and had much more chemistry. The older versions lacked that vibrant spirit, but I guess that's what happens when you get 27 years older. It makes sense that their chemistry would be lacking, so I wasn't that bothered by it. I just thought that the characters that weren't Eddie and Richie were bland. Bill Hader as older Richie Tozier was without a doubt the best part of this movie. My God, he is funny with these wisecracking quips, and he also delivers on an emotional level. I'm not kidding you. There's a look that he has towards the end that leveled me. I'm not going like, wow, he's a great actor showing an appropriate emotion, but I'm more like, wow, he brings empathy on the screen. He makes me empathize with whatever his character is going through at that moment. James Ransone as older Eddie Kaspbrak is another standout. He carries the neuroticism of the character well, and he's also pretty funny along with Hader. They just have really good chemistry with each other, just like the younger versions of themselves had. Because funny characters stick out in a violent and horror-filled film, it kind of makes the rest of the characters look meh. This isn't necessarily bad because it doesn't make sense for everyone to have such a front and center presence at all times. I'm not gonna lie, but I didn't know that the Old Spice guy, Isaiah Mustafa, could act. Some of the stuff that his character didn't make too much sense, but he pulled off this unknown quality to an older Mike. In the first movie, the character learned to be more assertive and to just do things that he may or may not want to do. This sort of comes into play in this movie because Mike takes action, whether or not it's rational. His supposed cowardice as a young boy makes sense because it's not expected for a young boy to save his folks from burning. It's a survivor's guilt guilt that he deals with, but this guilt trips him into doing stuff that may be well-intentioned, but it puts others in danger. James McAvoy truly inhabits Bill Denbrough by displaying a desire to stop Pennywise from killing more kids. His bravery makes sense for his character. He has more of an obligation as to why he acts the way he does. He's not as completely against the idea of defeating Pennywise as some of the others. I thought Jay Ryan as an older Ben Hanscom didn't make the most sense. It realistically doesn't make sense for someone like that to have 27 years pass by and is really sweet and ends up being good looking to not have anybody significant in his life. Yeah, it's nice for someone to wait all that time just for one person that treated them right despite their supposed imperfections in the past. Like, you knew me before I changed into this. You're the only one that understands me. I'm sorry, this is lame. Jessica Chastain as Beverly was different. It appeared to be an evolution of a character. In the first one, she's brave when she's with friends, but timid when she has to deal with unfortunate issues at home. I think as adults, we tend to lose the bravado we have as kids. We care for our safety and well-being more. How they did this supposed love triangle between Bill, Ben, and Beverly was underplayed. It didn't make sense. It was more like, she's supposed to pick this person because the book said so. It's destiny. Oh yeah, Andy Bean as older Stan. We see some of the neatness and the neuroticism. Oh, how can I forget Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise? I wish he was in it more. He's still the same weird, creepy clown that preys on people's fears and insecurities, and he's still delightfully terrifying. I just appreciate how off-kilter he is before he does his thing. This installment is not heavily character-driven, but it showcases Muschietti's horror filmmaking skills. The scares follow a pattern, so they're somewhat predictable. However, that doesn't mean that they're not fun to watch. It can be excessive, and I sort of wish a few were cut because they didn't have any tension. Visually, it's imaginative and entertaining. The former especially applies to the set pieces and production design. It's massive and epic in scale. I thought the music use fit the tone of the movie, but it felt too fitting. Music enhances a film, but it shouldn't distract or make something feel cheesy. It's really not a big deal. Overall, this movie is a somewhat long 3 hours. Bill Hader and James Ransone are the best parts of this movie, and the horror sequences come next. The rest of the adult versions of the cast were okay, and that's fine. The writing of the story could have been explained further. It's honestly difficult to balance 7 characters in a movie unless you're like The Big Chill, especially if you have to look back at their past. Despite being a long movie, it has its entertaining moments. However, it can't necessarily justify its long run time, but it's still worth watching.